William, welcome to the show, and let's cut straight to the chase and start talking about this new book of yours.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. And it's great to be with you. And thanks for the invite. And I've just published it September 5th. So today is the 28th, so fairly recently. And it's really just a compilation of all my research into this phenomenon, what's called publicly or known to people as the smiley face killers. This phenomenon of young men disappearing late at night, only to be found later in water, sometimes much longer than they should have been missing, 30 or 40 days like that. So I kind of got into it in a different route maybe than some of these other people's. I was researching book Children of the Beast, and I kept seeing the smiley face amongst other people. We were talking the pre-show about David Bowie and Black Star. And so I'm like, why is this smiley face everywhere? And I'd remembered this kind of urban legend about the smiley face killings. And I said, well, there's a smiley face everywhere. These two guys, Gannon and Gilbertson, are talking about the smiley face killers phenomenon. I wonder if there's some kind of cultural connection. So I started researching it 2016 or something like that. So it's been a while. I've compiled a lot of information. And I've done 2 documentaries, and you can see those on Vimeo. And so then it just made sense really with what's happened in the last 90, well, it's 100, like probably a year and a half, is so many like these types of deaths have happened, particularly in Austin, Chicago, Toronto, Vancouver. So it kind of flared up again. So I was like, it kind of just wrote itself because I was looking into those cases. And that was kind of the genesis of this book, is just all my research. So it's kind of a place to put it all in there. And I really took an approach to do kind of a historical review of like what I learned over time. So I include kind of the original researchers who are Gilbertson and Gannon. They wrote a book called Case Studies in Forensic Drownings. Is a very important part of the whole history of the research into the smiley face killings. They cover 14 cases. And I go from there, include things from Coast to Coast Radio who were interviewed, Larry King, some other very important websites and blog posts. And I think it kind of unravels to the reader that other people are looking into this. It's not just one guy or 2 guys. It's a lot of people are interested in trying to ascertain what's going on with these suspicious water deaths, really.
For those people who don't know, a lot of people do know, but for those that do not, this is the first time I'm covering it. I was aware of the name. I was aware that there was a 6-episode documentary series on oxygen or whatever, but I had not personally looked into this. So for the benefit of those who are new to this subject, just give us kind of a general overview of what the smiley face killer phenomena is and what characteristics constitute it.
So it really was, the name the smiley face killers was given to this phenomenon by the 2 original researchers that I was telling you about, Gilbertson and Gannon. And they were independently researching this. Gilbertson, I think, is from Wisconsin, and Gannon was a New York City police officer. And they independently noticed these deaths. And associated with those deaths, oftentimes they would find a spray painted smiley face, just a simple smiley face. In their case, they're all done in orange, which is really weird, all in the same color. And so it kind of became known as the smiley face killers phenomenon. And it was happening independently. So New York and Wisconsin, La Crosse, Wisconsin was kind of it used to be there were a lot of cases there at one time. So that was kind of how it got termed. And the phenomenon is defined as young men out at night, maybe not drinking too much, or something goes on, they walk home alone, never to be seen again alive, and then later to be found in water, oftentimes in places that were previously searched. So all of these people, it's not like a standard drowning where, like, Mike and Bob go to the lake at 3:00 and one drowns. This is something very different than that, where they're later found in water. Nobody sees them go into the water. That's another kind of component of this phenomenon, is the kind of mystery of how they ended up in the water. And I think all these cases that I've covered are all misadventure. Oftentimes, these people who are found in water are great swimmers, they're athletic, they're kind of in the prime of their life, really. So they should be able to, even if they're drunk, to fall in water and pop back out. And so that's really kind of what piqued my interest, is kind of the enigma of this whole event, like what is really going on. So that's kind of why I was interested in the subject and really compiling things and trying to figure out what type of person would do something like this. So that was another thing that I included in the book, is like offender, possible offender typology. But
We
yeah,
are going
that's
to
a
come.
general overview.
You mentioned that a lot of these guys were good athletes, and a lot of these guys were sizable young men, late teens to early to mid 20s. Initially, it seemed like a lot of these guys were Caucasian, but we're going to save that thought about them being good athletes, or some of them, because it ties into something I want to get to later. But what's super chilling to me as I was reading your book and trying to get up to speed on all this is, I guess the first case was, or at least the one that people think of as the first case, was Patrick McNeil, which I believe was Manhattan in 1997. And this young man leaves a bar and then he goes missing. And in many of these cases, when they're found in water, it is days, weeks, sometimes even a couple of months after they've gone missing, yet the body does not show the effects that you would expect of a person who's been in water for such a period of time.
Correct. And that's a very standard element of a lot of these cases, is the person should have been decomposing or something like that. And in the kind of like in the field of kind of medical examiners and stuff like that, they know that how a body decomposes over time in certain environments, water, land, desert, anything like that. So there's a certain amount of time, like they know that some of these bodies come out and they're very different, and oftentimes they show signs of injury that wouldn't happen in a drowning. So Patrick McNeil is a perfect example and a really important case, which is why I feature him right at the beginning, because he fit all the parameters of a smiley face killing victim. Young guy, 21, college educated, Fordham, Manhattan, not drinking too much. Somebody finds him stumbling around. He's being followed by a car and then disappears. So there's a space in between where he disappears and later he's found in a water treatment facility, and the family's in shock. Like, how did he get there? So they just accepted what the police told them. 10 years later, they got the autopsy report, and famed forensic pathologist Cyril Wecht looked at it and said, hey, this guy was tied up and hit with a blowtorch. So that was not made public at the time of the finding of Patrick McNeil. So these are very important elements that kind of unravel like what's going on. So somebody's abducting these people, keeping them somewhere, and then torturing or abusing them or something like that. And I think that's what happened to Patrick McNeil. And there's the thing, there's kind of a follow-up. There's not too many cases going back before 1997. So like you kind of have to look at these cases in the context of how is this happening? What happened in the mid 90s? There was a growth of the internet and travel and things like that. So maybe that's how this kind of MO got out into the public. Because it's certainly not just, some people make the mistake of thinking it's just one guy, but it seems to be different groups and different individuals committing these types of crimes.
That was going to be my next question. Was there any of these types of deaths by misadventure that happened prior to 1997? But it does seem to have started just then. One of the things that's very strange to me, I mean, the whole thing's horrifying. The fact that a person goes missing and shows up later deceased without the body disfiguration or decomposition that would occur if one was in water, which leads you to believe that the person was held. That is absolutely horrifying.
It really is. It's really terrifying. Like that's what's going on. And I've kind of correlated these types of events to kind of BDSM stuff. So I've looked into those type of things. I watched a documentary called Kink that was on, I think it was on Netflix at one point. But I think that there's an underground, and I think that there's an association with kind of pretty dark bars and gay bars and things like that, BDSM bars. That some of these, there was a guy, Arvind Sharma, who was in Washington D.C. He was last seen going into a bar that also doubled as like a BDSM club, and he disappeared. And the same thing happened to him. Like he disappeared, and then he was found upriver. Like how does he end up upriver from where he was? So that's one example. So I do think that that's it. And I also referenced this series of crimes that took place very famously in Australia. It's called the Family Murders in Adelaide. And that's what they were doing. They were abducting people and holding them for a time, and literally really horrible stuff. Like before they were, after they were killed, they were taking the bodies and literally taking their clothes off and cleaning the bodies and putting the clothes back on. So very thoughtful types of killings. Like these are not, to me, these are not crimes of like passionate crimes where people get angry at a bar. It's that somebody's calculating and thinking through all these things. And I think that's why I think that there's some element of, sexual interest is what I think is going on. That's why these young men are targeted.
You use the word kink, which actually, again, kind of presaged something that I was going to ask you about later, which is this idea that originally some of these guys were mostly Caucasian, but as we've seen in the ones that have happened this year, we've got African Americans, we've got Asians, et cetera. And I'm wondering, besides the ritualistic aspect of this, is if you thought that there was some type of perhaps kink or quirk, that why they choose who they choose. Because some of these cases that I've read, it appears that they were receiving threatening phone calls or texts before it happens, or they've had unusual run-ins with people that they narrowly escape, or they're just worried about their well-being, almost as if these people are being tracked, which tells you these aren't just random guys that they found outside of a bar who are intoxicated and vulnerable. In some of these cases, it seems like they found these people, these are the people they want, and then they wait for the opportune moment.
It seems like that in certain cases. One case that comes to mind is Dakota James in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I include a whole chapter on a really good article that was written by Nicole Wisency Egan about his what happened before he disappeared. And he had been in some kind of weird place where he had been drugged. He couldn't remember anything. He panicked and called his friend to come pick him up. And he was really in like there was a black like limo or something like that. And so it seems like he was targeted. And I've talked to people who said that's maybe it, is that this is some kind of weird thing where these people are targeted. There's a lot of correlation between the more modern cases and Grinder or gay apps and things like that. So these people may be pre-selected for what's happened to them, and that's another level of like horrible awfulness to these cases. But I think some are really just random events,
Mm.
or somebody's on a prowl. Like if some, I mean, I kind of liken it to like a Jeffrey Dahmer or something like that, because he just kind of went out to bars and he was a guy who would drug people. He got kicked out of like a gay bathhouse for drugging guys. So there's a lot of these people either are drugged or they don't remember stuff. And just there's a lot of people who are like, there's actually about 3 or 4 cases of people who've like woken up in fields or somewhere and they don't remember anything. So they were possible victims of this type of phenomenon. But I do believe some of these people are selected. I don't think there's any doubt.
When we talk about the drug that shows up in the bodies of many of these people, the one that I keep reading is GHB, which is gamma hydroxybutyrate. It's a depressant. It slows down messages traveling between the brain and the body. It's used as a party drug sometimes. The only medical use that I can find is it's used to treat narcolepsy. I believe in Canada, that's the use of it. Um, but of the cases that I mean, there's hundreds of them. How often do you think that GHP shows up in the autopsies or the bodies of these victims?
It's a great question. I think a lot of them were drugged. A lot of these people exhibit personality changes when they're at the bar. Like there's one case that comes to mind, the recent case in Austin. Like this guy was a younger guy who wasn't doing drugs, and then he goes to a bar and has 1 or 2 drinks and starts fighting with the bouncer and gets kicked out. Like very strange personality changes. So I think that that's a very central component to a lot of these, are that they're drugged in one way or another. They might have been shocked with something or something to subdue them. But the GHB is endogenous. It's something that's already in our brain. So it's harder to trace. So when somebody I don't know what the dose is, but certain dose, the person will black out and not remember anything, but then the body will process it and go out. So it's not like a drug. They have to test for it very early to get a trace of it, like an representation in the human body, is my understanding. So it's also kind of a optimal drug because these guys won't, the medical examiners may not even test for it. But it's very prevalent in there was like in gay communities. I covered this guy who was a serial killer in England. His name was Stephen Port, and his tactic was to drug people with GHB, and that was part of kind of his party regimen, was to do that as well. So I think that that was kind of just his lifestyle, and having access to this kind of drug.
As I'm reading your book, and this material is new to me, but one of the things that goes through my head, listen, I spent a lot of times in clubs in the 80s and 90s, and we've always, told people, especially women, watch your drink. But one of the things that is weird to me is that I think that I heard you say this in one of your previous interviews, or maybe it's in the book, the reticence from club owners sometimes to be forthcoming to law enforcement when investigating this. And the reason that I bring that up is because if someone's dosing these people, they're almost certainly dosing them inside the club. And so you would think that there would be uh, CCTV, there would be some kind of video. You would have some clue who might have done it, which almost, and I hate to say this because I mean, it almost feels like an inside job. Like, there's certain clubs where this thing is going to happen and somebody knows, but this is pure speculation on my behalf. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have a lot of thoughts. I think some of these are inside jobs at the bars. I think the bartenders or some people, that's maybe how they target people. And there's been strange events with bouncers and things like that.
Yeah.
Like there was a case in Boston. His name was Zach Marr, and he went out for a smoke, and then the bouncer wouldn't let him back in. He said, "You're drunk." He's like, "I'm not drunk." And then he's texting his family members. They won't let me back in. That was strange. There was another one, Chris Jenkins. So there may be very suspicious things. And if you look in the larger culture, the druggings that take place in these clubs in major cities is an epidemic. Like people are getting drugged a lot in Austin, in LA here. So it seems to be a part, and there was a huge, well, actually not a huge, there was two big drugging, thieving groups, one in New York City and one in Austin, and they would target people in clubs. That was their thing. A little dropper, right in their drink, and then they would take them back to their car and steal all their stuff. And they actually, the one that the thief club, I don't know whether they were involved in any murder, but the ones that were in New York City, this is within the last year, they targeted like gay clubs intentionally for whatever reason. That was kind of where their trolling ground was. So weird things are going on. And then the New York cases that just happened this year, back to back, 2003, there were two guys, um, probably both drugged, like acting strange and going home. That was what was it?
Is that coming out of the EDM club?
Yeah, the EDM club. Yeah, that's right.
So, okay, so what you're talking about,
Yes.
for the listeners, there was two different guys, I think like a month apart. They leave this club, and the name of the club escapes me at the moment, but it's electronic music club.
All right.
There's
The
concerts.
Mirage.
Yeah, something like that. And so there's concerts there. These guys each go to the separate concert, but they both get drugged, disappear, and don't they wind up in the same body of
Yeah.
water?
Same river. Yeah. 45 days apart. So it's almost like somebody went there to, commit a crime. And that's also another thing. Like the venues, there's a lot of people who come out of music venues and are later found in water and disappeared. One comes to mind in Pittsburgh is a guy by the name of Jimmy Slack. And a lot of these guys, TD Garden, people come out of like Boston's Celtics games and things like that, and they disappear too. So there's actually three guys associated with TD Garden that met misadventure. It's William Hurley, a guy by the name of Kelleher, and then this other guy who I brought up in my case that's happened just within the last year, walked out of TD Garden. He was found in the water face down, and somebody resuscitated him. And he had a huge, like a welt on the side of his face. And it's an incredible story because his name was Josh. I know his full name, but he there's actually a picture of the person who's overseeing his body, and they never interviewed that guy. It's super frustrating because that could break open the entire SFK case. So literally, this guy Josh almost died, face down, rescued, and handled by somebody they don't even know his name. It's incredible.
This was in Pittsburgh,
That's in Boston,
i-
Massachusetts.
in Boston. So this
Yeah,
guy recovers, but they don't
correct.
follow up on the case.
They don't follow up on the case. That's exactly right.
Well,
And that's
before
kind of in a later chapter in my book. Let me see if I can find the chapter heading. It is Injured Man Rescued from Water Near TD Garden in downtown Boston. So you can check that out. That was November 4th, 2022. So it was within the last year.
also, I heard you mention in one of the interviews that the activities we're going to talk about the fact that law enforcement and the FBI refuse to acknowledge this as being something beyond urban myth. We're going to talk about that later in the show. But before we move to Austin and Chicago and the murders that have happened in the previous year, I heard you mention on another show that it seemed to recede a bit during the COVID years. And I'm wondering if that's because, well, twofold. So a lot of clubs and bars were closed. People were discouraged from going to clubs and bars. Or do you think that there's another reason, or all of the above?
I think that everything was shut down. So I
Yeah.
think that probably once it started opening back up, it ignited everything, and it started happening all over the country, really, and happened in the UN in London for sure. There's a couple cases there of young men, but it is interesting. It kind of changed the victim type. It used to be all kind of white Caucasian people. Now it's like Indian, South Asian, or whatever you want to typify that ethnic group. A lot of those in Canada, a lot of African Americans in Chicago.
Well, let's talk about Austin and Chicago, because this summer, apparently we had what, 4 or 5 different mysterious deaths. I'm from Texas, never lived in Austin, but it's a city. It's a very interesting town. There is bodies of water there, but talk about what happened in Austin this summer.
It just like a whole bunch of cases really happened. There was all kinds of it, and I put it in there, and it really kind of lit up social media too. That was what was interesting about the Chicago and Austin cases, is something that I didn't see. It was a kind of a new element. Maybe the Boston cases were similar, but these ones really captured people's imaginations, and so there was a lot of social media things about the Chicago and Austin cases. But the Austin cases were remarkable. Like there was back to back to back. Um, there was Clifton Axtell, March 5th, 2023. Jason John, an interesting story too, because he worked for Eco Health Alliance, which is a whole nother story. But that's like
Mm-hmm.
the CIA front. So he ends up in an SFK death, and there was another suspicious guy. This is a side story. His name was Cunningham, who worked for the CDC. He ended up found in a river too, which gets pretty deep, heavy duty, like deep state stuff. But Jason John, Jonathan Honey, Christopher Hayes Clark. So back to back to back. These are all within 4 months. There's 5 bodies found in just Lady Bird Lake. So it's just this small lake that's kind of south of downtown Austin.
And Texas has had a bit of a drought for the last year or two. So the lakes and the rivers are, in most cases, pretty low right now, which gets, in many of these cases, the bodies of water that these victims are found is shallow. And we're going to come back to that later too. But you mentioned these, and here again, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to speculate fully. You mentioned that this one gentleman was involved with Eco Health Alliance. Another person was involved with the CDC, which leads me to think, is there the possibility that sometimes, and I believe that these were not Caucasians, correct? In these two
That's
cases?
correct. Cunningham was very talented African American guy who went to Harvard, and Jason John was Indian American.
So it made me think, I wonder if there are some times that there are deaths that are being made to look like smiley face killers for other reasons.
Yeah, I would agree with you for sure. I think people are copycatting. And I think they've copycatted females too. There was a huge case that took place I didn't include it in my book, but people can look that up in the UK. It was about a female Her name was Bully, Bulley, and it fit all the parameters of a smiley face killing case. She was out walking her dog. She disappears. Huge search the river. 2 weeks pass, and then all of a sudden she just miraculously reappears in the river, dead, unfortunately. But that really captured the imagination of the British public. And I was just thinking to myself, yeah, that's an SFK case. Somebody's probably emulating this MO. And also they want to fit certain people in there. I think of like that one guy who went around and he was shooting people, sniping people, John Muhammad, but he was really trying to set it up to kill his wife and make it look like she was just part of a serial killing.
Was that the
So
guy on the East Coast with the younger accomplice?
correct, correct.
I didn't know the part where he was just doing this to kill his wife. I didn't know that. I don't or
That
didn't
was my
remember that.
understanding. I could be corrected, but my understanding is that he was doing the killings, but he really wanted to just kill and one of his ex-partners included in there and make it look like it was a serial killing, but he really was wanting to kill her. But yeah. So I think your speculation is correct. I think some people are doing it. That's why this is like it's not just one person. It's clearly
Mhm.
kind of a phenomenon, and people have learned the phenomenon. They've discussed it maybe, and this phenomenon actually precedes the smiley face killers. People being found in water. If you remember William Colby, he was the former head of the CIA. He went out and went rafting or boating or whatever in his canoe, disappeared. Huge search, can't find him. All of a sudden, he reappears in a river. Like that's a very important big person. He knows where
Mhm.
all he literally knows where the bodies are buried, not
Mhm.
figuratively. So that's one case. And also the mob was known to dump people in water. That was like one of the disposal methods. And apparently in New York, there's like hundreds of bodies of people who didn't make it. So maybe somebody just kind of turned the MO into something. People who are criminally more sophisticated turned the MO into their own usage, and their target was younger men for whatever reason.
Well, one of the things that strikes me about this is this reticence, this from the FBI and law enforcement and medical professionals. They want to disregard this as being some epi- epidemic of these murders that somehow this is all just young people got intoxicated, fell into a body of water. I mean, which is ludicrous. But to me, I have to ask myself, so why are they so against looking into this? And then you bring up this idea that one of these guys was part of Eco Health Alliance. One guy was related to the CDC. So that made me think, well, maybe sometimes they're adopting this MO to make it look like something else. And I have to think that intelligence agencies and law enforcement must know more about all of this than they're letting on.
I think so. I truly think so. I think they've collected information. I think their opinions, like I have the FBI statement from 2008, where like they don't believe in anything's happening, but so much has happened since then. It's hard to deny, and that's one of the purposes for this book. Is it's hard to deny something's going on that's very suspicious. That's the title of the book. So I think they know more. I think they could probably put resources in there, but I think there's a lot of face saving, and they probably don't want to panic the public. Like I talked to another guy, he said it's like, he was likening it to Jaws, where they don't want to, people are being eaten, but they don't want to disrupt business. I mean, the consequences to say your kids are at risk at a college would be immense. There's a serial killer at, Minnesota, University of Minnesota. Your kid could die. Nobody would want to send their kid there. So there's huge financial, I think, things at stake and a lot of reputational costs if they found out. Because this is a different kind of crime. This is a different kind of crime spree that is unusual because it's much more sophisticated. So it's easier for them to kind of blow it off, in my opinion, the FBI. But they have been in the Dakota James case. His mother went into a meeting with the DA in Pittsburgh, and sitting in a chair with the DA was somebody from the FBI and another person from the Secret Service. So I don't know what they're there for, and I don't know, I know the secrecy of the kind of deep state administrative bodies and stuff like that. But I don't know. I don't know what they're compiling, but I can do them a huge favor. They should read my book because I have so many cases in here of this type of phenomenon happening that it's obvious that there's multiple parties, multiple groups out there doing this kind of abduction and killing. Yeah.
You talk about this not wanting to scare people, and it's like on a macro level, major urban cities have descended into absolute lawlessness in the last, 5 to 10 years. And then you throw in this thing. Yeah, you could scare people. And I think realistically, maybe everybody needs to be scared on a massive level to get lawmakers and law enforcement to do something about this, because major cities, I mean, we live in Los Angeles. Look at Chicago, look at Philadelphia, look at New York, look at what has happened. And speaking of Chicago, tell us a little bit about the murders that happened in Chicago this year.
There were a lot. I mean, there were many, many, many deaths over a period of maybe 2 or 3 years since the COVID kind of went away. But there were many back to back to back. So that was really what was shocking is people really noticed it. And there was one Noah Enos, June 12th, 2023. There was Alejandro Arce, April 2nd, 2023. There was another guy, Richard Garcia, April. These guys are all found in water. And then there was another one that I followed, which was Seamus Gray, who died outside of Chicago in the very north part in Waukegan. Young guy, member of the Merchant Marines, and supposedly fell in water, and they couldn't find him. They did a huge search, and then he miraculously just reappeared a month later, which is really incredible. And somebody found a smiley face in the ground where he was found. So I don't know if what they're doing or tagging or mocking people, but those are unbelievable cases. And it just, I mean, I think the Chicago natives realize, hey, this is a pattern that's undeniable. And those are all people out late at night, later to be found in water. So, and Chicago's a hotspot, so it goes back. I mean, you can go back to some of the earlier cases in Chicago. Wellsine is one guy I remember, but there's a lot of cases there. And one of the cases I remember in Chicago was a guy who was celebrating Obama's presidential rally or parade, disappears later to be found in water. So, like, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time with some dangerous characters, in my opinion.
Well, you brought up the O word, so let's segue to this for a second, because when I'm thinking about bodies of water, um, people dying, one of the other things that I thought about this was just perhaps it's superficial, but how a lot of this sounds a bit similar to the missing 411
Yeah.
type murders or deaths of people in national parks, where they would find people in bodies of water. They would go missing. They'd do a search. Nothing's found. Then next thing you know, they find the person in the body of water that they've already searched. Well, this summer, this very strange thing happened with the Obama chef. And I'm not saying this was a smiley face killer murder, but I thought it was super odd. And it just kind of blinked out of existence as far as its importance in the news cycle. This young man who was their chef of, I believe, 13 years and was a really good swimmer, apparently. I mean, he used to post photos of himself on social media of him swimming. Well, he goes paddleboarding, supposedly. And I'm looking at my notes. And of course, now I can't find my dates on this. I believe this was in August.
July 23rd, 2023 is when the call came in the evening, which is very
Yes.
strange too.
Yeah, so like 7:45 or something in the
Right.
evening, and I believe it's on a Sunday. And this young man goes paddleboarding with some other woman or some other person who we then believe to be a female and perhaps part of the staff. He's paddleboarding. He does not have the bracelet on his ankle. He's a good swimmer, and he dies in 4 feet of water, and they don't find his body until 10 a.m. the next day. Your thoughts?
Hyper suspicious, and it's a SFK type killing, in my opinion. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And like where Obama is conveniently not there, they're has a relationship for 13 or 14 years, it typically becomes a close relationship. And just to kind of add to the story, it's no, my understanding is that some of the male paramours of the former president are put in positions where the public doesn't know what they're doing. So a personal trainer or a cook
Yeah.
or something like that. So the relationship may be a little closer than a purely I work for you relationship. So Tafari Campbell, there's pictures of him swimming, and
Mhm.
who goes out on a paddleboard, which is a flotation device. You can
Yeah.
just grab onto it. Who goes out there without putting the ankle bracelet on? So that's like it doesn't add up. I wouldn't there. I don't even know they don't make them anymore that don't have the rope on it or whatever, the attachment, because then when you fall off, it stays with you so you can just yank it back and get back on. So that whole story and the timing too is very odd, like on a Sunday night when everything's quiet and it's like the perfect time to have something unfortunate happening when there's not everybody out for Friday or Saturday night. So there's been other cases where the bodies are found on Monday morning. I think that Dakota James was found on Monday morning too, which is also kind of makes this Tafari Campbell quote drowning even more suspicious. And there's the stories that came out weren't all clear either. And then somebody took a picture of Obama and he had his
Yeah.
left hand with band-aids and stuff like that. So the whole story is just it's hard to believe that's really what happened. Like they went out paddleboarding at night or like where's the time missing? So when does the sun go down and when what happened, right?
And
So
why
like,
is it
hey, if the sun's going down, let's go paddleboarding. It doesn't really make sense. So where was there this time between the call and when they were out in the water? And
there
it's super shallow. It's like four average is 4 feet deep. You can check that out yourself or a
there
public.
was a there was a Daily Mail article because I went back and it's funny because I was going to ask you about this and then there it is in the book. But there was a Daily Mail article that came out right just a couple of days after this happened, and the two Obama daughters were seen, flying out of
Martha's
that
Vineyard.
location.
Yeah,
Yeah, and so
Martha's
they're
Vineyard.
but they speak with one of the neighbors, and one of the neighbors, and his name is in the article. I'm not going to out him here, but anybody can read it. The title of the article is Malia and Sasha Obama are pictured leaving Martha's Vineyard after death of private chef Tafari Campbell. Anyway, in the course of this article, he talks about how the fact the day before on Saturday that they had witnessed the girls out there with some friends and they're having fun. And the guy goes on to say, we assumed that Barack and Michelle were there as well. So we don't even know for sure if they were there or not. But if they weren't there, why was the chef there? I mean, he's cooking for the daughters, perhaps. I don't know. And I don't know what all this means, but I think it's pretty piss poor journalism by the entire media industry that nobody followed up on this and they're just given a pass. If this had been another politician, especially a conservative politician, and somebody just like dies on their property, I mean, there would have been hell to pay, but not in this particular case.
No doubt. Well, I mean, I think all the national media is leans left, and they're just going to cover for anything. They cover for Hunter Biden, they cover for Joe. So why wouldn't they cover for this guy who's probably the real decision maker? Really, him and his crew are probably the ones really running the government. It's not Biden or Harris. So uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
I agree with that. So let's continue on with this because that gets back also to this fact that it seems like the intelligence agencies, the FBI's in particular, they're like, nah, this is an urban legend. This is just people's overactive imagination in the true crime genre, and people are craving new content related to serial killers or whatever. But just, I mean, if you spend 1 hour reading William's book or many of these other articles, you will see that there is just way too much weirdness. And we're looking at 300 on the minimum different people who've died under these parameters that we described in the earlier part of the show for this just to be an urban legend. So let's talk about the symbol of the smiley face itself, because that is where this whole thing got its name. And I remember working in bookstores. I don't remember what year Watchmen came out, but I remember the graphic novel because it was like one of the first big graphic novels, I think, with like Dark Knight or whatever. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. The smiley face with the blood spot on it. So let's just talk about the symbol of the smiley face and your research on that.
Well, that's kind of how I came, like explained earlier, that's how I got interested in this phenomenon, was seeing Alan Moore's Watchmen and reading through it and watching the film. And the comedian has this kind of smiley face, and his character is the comedian. So he's kind of like a Joker archetype, a Joker figure who laughs at crime and things like that. And that's what he reflects in the book. Like he goes to Vietnam and just indiscriminately kills everything that walks or crawls. The comedian does, and laughs about it. He's enjoying it. So I think that that may have some, that kind of concept has something to do with the use of the smiley face. I'm not initiated, but I know these guys are heavily involved in the occult. I know that Moore even said he spends half of his time writing comics and the other half doing occultism. And he talks to some kind of snake demon god. I forgot the name of it, but like it gets pretty heavy. And he's covered a lot of other stuff like masonry
Yeah.
and a lot of other things. So that's kind of it. And I just see it in the common culture. Like I have that one chapter, Smiley Face in Film and Culture. It's all over the place. So we talked about Bowie, Black Star. It's in Watchmen. It's in this movie, Kill California. It's really, and it's in
Fight Club.
Fight Club. Thank you. It's all placed throughout Fight Club secretly. There's a
Yes.
scene there, but it's also kind of hidden in certain areas and even in the promotional films. And so that's also an interesting tie-in with like Chuck Palahniuk and all these other characters.
In 2016, I interviewed Jim Uhls, who wrote the screenplay for Fight Club, and I wish that I had known all of this at the time. I had watched the film, and he was a friend of a friend, so he agreed to do an interview with me, and I was not aware. I just thought the smiley face was kind of a symbol of nihilism. But now when you bring it into this context of all this, and here's something that, William, I just want to ask you, because a lot of our people in our community who do what we do and research, and I'm not initiated either. Now, people say, well, wait a minute, you've got white and black, sound reinforcement behind a picture of the moon. So are you initiated? Absolutely, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not. I just thought they looked cool, and you can get that same moon at Home Depot for $29.99. People have asked me about that on things before. No.
If I grab my chin too many times, people think I'm trying to send some kind of occult symbol. I'm just literally just rubbing my chin, people. I'm not initiated. I've never done any occult stuff. I'm not a member of any occult group. So,
well, William, that's my point, because the other day I was talking to some other show about Satanism, and here's where it gets tricky for me, because and I've said this for a decade probably, when we get into entertainment and just people being kind of nuts sometimes and want to be dramatic, it is easy to adopt the trappings of these things. So you never really know. And listen, I'm a huge Bowie freak, and I'm not saying that Bowie didn't study Crowley and all those things, because he most certainly did. And in the 70s, he had a really severe coke problem, and, was an avowed occultist. However, now we come into the current period, and you can't watch a Super Bowl or a rap video sometimes without seeing things that you could say, well, wait a minute, that's adopted. And all I'm saying is just, and perhaps this is, I'm playing devil's advocate, no pun intended, that sometimes we want to kind of shock people and make people think that we're more dark than we are. So it becomes even more convoluted. Now, certainly there are some people who are just straight up into this evil, which brings me to something that you brought. I've never heard of this before until your work, which is the Order of Nine Angles. And you tie that to the Smiley Face Killers. What is the Order of Nine Angles, and who is David Wyatt?
Great question. So the Order of Nine Angles is an occult group that really started in the early 80s. And David Wyatt is from the UK. He was a member of the far right in the UK. I think it was called National Action, which was their kind of Nazi party. And so he was a Nazi and an occultist. And so his occult side, he put together this ONA with a bunch of different ideas. But I had a guy reach out to me and I have a chapter about him in our conversations. His name is Igor Sarsky. And so we kind of went into their ideology, and they have this very strange ideology that they're trying to like create this Homo galacticus, like a new man, like the Uberman, and that the Homo Hubriati, or the average person, is kind of like a lesser being,
Yeah.
and you should opt for them. You should sacrifice them or kill them. And so in his whole structure, like he learned, Myatt learned from Crowley and a lot of other occultists. I actually talked to Michael Aquino from the Temple of Set. I don't know if you know that name, but and it's in my other book, that's Global Death Cult. But this whole opfer thing is like you're supposed to go out and kill, but not be caught. So the concept is to engage in mayhem, but do it secretly. And so the concepts within the Order of Nine Angles overlapped kind of with what the ideas of the MO of what people were thinking. I was thinking, Igor Sarsky was thinking about why people would do this. What's the motivation? Like, why are you going out and why would somebody want to commit this type of crime? And I think the ONA would explain that. So they would think that these people are kind of lesser beings, that they were arrogant, or their drinking was exemplar of not a good character or something like that. And so that would be the thing to do it. And then that would bring credibility to that person within the ONA organization, because you would move up the ladder. I think the third, it's a septenary way, 7 steps. You have to do kind of exeata, they call it exeata, but you'd have to like go out at night and sit awake from sundown to sunset, and then jog like 30 miles and do all the stuff. And then the 4th step is to select and commit an offer. So anybody who takes that seriously, that would be a reason to do it. And they have kind of like learning guides, almost like kind of like a fable or something, where it's obviously fiction, but within that fiction, they're teaching people how to conduct these crimes and go to another city, avoid the CCTV, like do very like thinking about it. And so these aren't type of like off the cuff kind of criminals, but people who are planning and trying to commit these crimes. And a lot of these crimes happen outside of CCTV. It's very interesting. And there's been some kind of interesting postings on YouTube channels and stuff that these guys know actually how to check the CCTV system in the UK, which is really incredible. And that's on ONA sites. And I found on ONA sites the use of the smiley face symbol as well. So there's a tie-in between ONA ideology, and it's an interesting kind of ideology because it's not intended to just encompass itself. Like the way that it's designed is like people can take whatever they want from it. And so it influenced the Nazi movement here in the States, Atomwaffen, and it's still influencing artists today. If you watch, there's a song, Bad Habits, and I included it in my book. It's by Ed Sheeran, like maybe the top 10 musician in the world, but he's literally playing out in Bad Habits in the video the whole ONA ideology, vampirism, changing your body, selecting an offer. They're looking at all these people like they're, just a hoi polloi. So it has the satanic verities where like you're superior and they're not. And so the ONA is a potential, ideology that's influencing people to commit these SFK type of crimes. And I think it makes sense, because then it kind of like they don't like the ONA is very contemptuous of what they would call the Nazarene system that encompasses Jews and Christians. So a lot of these victims are really hardcore Christians, like Todd Geib reminds me of that. So it may be part of like an occult, like a unbelievable, but literally an occult war, like an occult witch warlock war against Christianity or Christians to get rid of them and bring in this kind of new, what they would call a dark aeon, like a new aeon of kind of magic and human sacrifice and things like that.
One of the
Kind
things
of like
that
Crowley.
this is super creepy, and you put this in one of your blog posts about the Order of the Nine Angles. So this David Myatt or Wyatt, he says to Michael Aquino, who you mentioned earlier, I'm just going to read these two sentences. According to Maya, what distinguishes the ONA from other satanic groups is their attitude to human sacrifice, or what their writings refer to as a culling. And then he quotes, he says, if there is one thing which expresses the essence of satanic ethos, it is culling. And if there is one way to detect a pseudo Satanist, it is their attitude to culling. And I was thinking in my mind, it's like, it's interesting that Satanists are drawn, or perhaps the right is drawn to Satanism, or Satanism is drawn to kind of right-wing type things. But then I also think, because basically they're talking about the useless eater idea, like you and I and all the regular people, we're just the useless eaters. But that's also kind of a World Economic Forum kind of outlook,
Right.
and which is more leftist. So it's basically, it's just this idea that to these people, regardless of their political inclinations, they view a majority of humanity as disposable, unnecessary, and undesirable.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. And I think that the ONA is super contemptuous. Like, it's just us against them. If you read through their literature, and I've included a lot of it into my book Global Death Cult. It's just us against them. We have our own doctrines. We're above them. We're above the law. Like, these are the kind of ideas. And I mean, if you get a true believer, that person is really trouble. And they have this whole idea of like uh, infiltrating places. So you're supposed to kind of infiltrate to learn, but you're really not part of them. You're really an ONA member. So you infiltrate Nazis or you infiltrate the left. And still, as long as there's discord and enmity and warfare, then you're in the right place, whether it's coming from the left or the right. That's the way the ONA would think about it. They would call it an insight rule. So it's very sophisticated. The ONA is a much smarter cult, like stream, other than like the Church of Satan or the Temple of Set. It's much more clever and much more lethal. So if somebody's out there doing it, it's really trouble. And the other thing is, like, it dispersed itself. It's not something like that is contained in a geographic area. There's been ONA members. There's a guy called William von Nudegem in Toronto who was an ONA influence and went out and would stab people in the middle of the night. So he had his op where he would do his whole sacrifice thing. He ended up getting caught. But yeah, you're not supposed to get caught. And there's the same thing happened in London. There was a guy, his name was Hussein, forgot his first name, but he did the same thing. He made some blood oath and he said, I'm not going to get caught. And he went out to a park and killed two women, like celebrating a birthday party. Total waste of time. Like, so the ideas of the ONA are definitely influencing people. They just had a kid who's going to court, I think, next month out in New York, who has this whole ONA ideology, and they were really nasty, like child porn, child abuse. And he was a Latino guy. I forgot his name offhand. I have it right here. But yeah, so the ONA, as far as overlapping with the SFK or Smiley Face Killers cases, I think it's a real thing. And I think that there might be out there. I mean, it requires further research, but yeah.
Well, William, we're coming up on about an hour, so I want to wrap this up. But let me ask you this. I mean, your book is out there, The Smiley Face Killers, Investigating Suspicious Water Deaths of College-Aged Men in the U.S. and the World. There was the mini-series on oxygen. There is a lot of knowledge or awareness about this phenomena on the internet. There's plenty of Reddit forums. There's people on YouTube. There's internet folks like you and I, podcasters, bloggers, et cetera, talking about this. So it feels to me like it must be reaching a great deal more awareness probably than ever. So I'd like to think, I would hope that perhaps this will lead those within law enforcement, intelligence, et cetera, and within the hospitality industry itself to take this seriously. Because look, I used to own a club. I love going to clubs. I love listening to music. And I hate to think that that's one more thing. I mean, you've always had to be careful, but do you think that maybe at some point this will be taken more seriously, and there will be some resolve to finding out what this is all about?
I think it is being, like you said, it's more, the awareness is increased for sure. And I think people are more aware, more men are aware to watch themselves. So I think that men would never, like you said earlier, they don't see themselves as a target, women do. But I think that if these continued murders take place, I think that the law enforcement community will have to address it. And I think my book is a push in that direction, the attempt to, like, hey guys, here's the information. It's all here. I got 300 cases. I've got the facts, numbers, names, dates, locations. Like, how can you deny it now? Like, we're able to deny it. Like, I did a section on debunking the debunkers, where people have tried to debunk it, but they actually do very clever, kind of sophistic things where they leave out all the information. I
Right.
only see one. There's no way this is happening. All I did is read Gilbertson and Gannon's book, and so that's it. But there's so much more to that, just like you said. So I'm hoping that the public understands this, that people tell their kids to be careful, don't get drugged, and men can get drugged. And you don't want to go through what some of these guys went through. Like, I think Dakota James probably kept alive for like 30 days.
Yeah.
And the same thing, Tommy Booth in Pennsylvania. These guys, they're very cruel, like very cruel kind of dungeon type stuff. And so I'm hoping that nobody gets hurt, people stay safe, and that the law enforcement community does its job and looks into these things and actually carries out. Like I just mentioned earlier, the guy who was like hit with something and ended up face down near TD Gardens. If the cops did their job, they could find the guy who was holding onto his body before he got pulled out of the water and investigate him and see who he knows, what his deal is, what his ideas are. Is he a member of the ONA? What's his motivation? I mean, these guys committing, like, are they trying to give sacrifices to Typhon? Like, is it the rise of occultism? What's going on? Like, they need to ask those questions. And that's kind of another thing about, I mean, just to add on to that, is law enforcement and occultism are not two things that go well together. They
No.
usually don't see that as a motivation. So if that's the kind of motivation, they're not going to be interested. And that goes all the way back to like the FBI, Ken Lanning, some of these other characters. So that is also kind of a disincentive, I think, for them to kind of look into this stuff. But I do think that some kind of secret knowledge or some kind of occult group or something has something to do with this of some sort, So this phenomenon, yeah.
Thanks, you guys, for listening. Please rate and review this podcast and subscribe to Michael Parker Media for more episodes. I'll be back in a few days with another one. And until next time, keep your heart and your mind open. Peace.